So again, oh, there's our cue to get started. So I was just going to say, as we're waiting, if you will just put your name and contact information into the chat. But we will go ahead and get started with our session today. As you can see, we are recording today's session. We record those for educational and quality improvement sessions. We store those on our Canvas page as well as our YouTube channel. So you are able to go back and share that information with colleagues, with others, or just review it yourself. If you don't wish to be recorded, you can hit that leave button and it will remove you from today's session. We are hopefully trying to be interactive, even though we are virtual. That's always a hard world to navigate, being virtual and being interactive. But if you can take a minute and turn on your camera so we can see everybody, if you want to drop information into the chat, Kurt Phillips, one of our hub members, will be monitoring that chat and make sure that your questions get answered. And just a huge thank you to all of our hub members that help facilitate this hub, this Echo network. They all have an asterisk, or now will have an asterisk since I just reminded them in front of their names, so they are easier to find on chat. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to them or reach out to our email. We always encourage case discussions or case narratives, however you want to call them. And they're a great way and resource to learn about a client or a family that you're working with from all these amazing people on the call. I always love when I get to do a case that I am working on, because then I have a lot of resources to take back to that family. They are sometimes nerve-wracking to present a case. So if you ever are interested in presenting a case, but just don't want to share it, please reach out to me. I'll be glad to talk about your case and get you all those amazing resources that come from everybody on this call. That's one of the things I love about this Echo network, is because like there's Annabelle Durham that just came across my chat box. I mean, she is from Independent Living Centers, and that's not something that I always work with. And so I'd love to get her ideas. And when she shares something, then I know how to reach back out to her and say, hey, Annabelle, can you tell me a little bit more? Or I have this family that is struggling with this. And again, it's just a great way to build that professional networking and gaining more resources from everybody who we all know deal with some of the same things that we're all working on with that. As we are talking about things, we do talk about sensitive topics. And so just remembering to protect individual privacy. So don't use identifiable information. And again, if you have any questions, just reach out to us and we'll let you know whether or not that is an identifiable information. If you've never joined an Echo session, welcome. We're glad that you're here. There are components of an Echo session. We always have a speaker about a specific topic that you as learners have requested from us. So we try to respond to your survey results and make sure that we are doing this professional development so it fits your guys' needs. And then we do that case presentation and feedback. And again, trying to build up that professional networking over Zoom. We've been on Zoom for a while, so hopefully everybody knows how to rename their profile. But here are some of those steps on that. I'm going to quickly move to how to raise our hand. If you have any questions about how to do either one of those, please just send me a chat and I will walk you through that. We always love to have pre-registration. It gets us to be able to hand you that information ahead of time, as well as get you those certificate of attendance. So please consider pre-registering. And then leading us to how to get a credit of attendance is filling out the surveys. So throughout today's session, Shayna will be dropping in our survey link. Thank you to everybody who does and continues to fill out those surveys. It really is what we then take back to our funders and say, look at all this that is going on within our echo sessions, and are able to keep these professional developments free to all of us. So again, thank you for always filling those out. We do store everything on our Canvas page. So if you would like access to our Canvas page, you can just email us at timetoact@aggies.usu.edu, and we will get you registered for that. Again, just another plug for those case studies, those case narratives, case presentations, whatever you want to call them. Sometimes a case discussion sounds a little less intimidating than a case study, but they are really just a great way to hear from all these amazing people that are on the call, to get some recommendations about some real life situations that we are all dealing with in our everyday work. We do have a Facebook group that would be another way to continue that professional networking and having discussions after the session. So if you would want to join that network, or that Facebook group, please just scan that QR code. And then we also do have other social media. And I'm really excited about today's topic. This was a topic that was referred to several times on our surveys, and it is really about just burnout in the workplace. And so I'm really thrilled to have Emma be here with us today to share that. And I'm going to stop sharing and turn the time over to her.
Great, thank you so much. And bear with me here, folks, as I share my screen. We've practiced, but things happen, right? Okay. All right, you all should be seeing my presentation screen. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Oh, I just pressed escape.
Oh, well, yeah, I was like, we were.
Now you should.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Get just situated over here. Okay, great. So my name is Emma Parkhurst. I'm from USU Extension in Davis County. I'm super excited to be here to present this topic to you all because it affects everybody. I'm going to try my best not to go off on tangents because this is an area I feel very passionately about, also in the workplace, but also in the home. So here is what we're going to be talking about today. We'll just kind of go over a quick introduction and then an overview of burnout, and we'll talk about the impact and common causes, as well as go over some prevention methods. We're going to touch briefly on how managers can help with this prevention, but then we're going to really focus on what we can do personally because there's a lot of different reasons why we're experiencing burnout. And I just want to acknowledge that it's not just on us as employees, it's up to the organization to pitch in as well. Hi, I'm Emma. So I'm a Utah native. I am a professional practice extension assistant professor. I mixed up extension and assistant, and I just realized. And basically what that means is I am health and wellness faculty in Davis County, and I teach all things health and wellness. And in the extension world, we kind of refer to our students as the community. So we're part of USU, and we also have an agreement with our local government as well as the federal government to bring down that institutional level, research-based, non-biased information to the community in more easily digestible ways and more fun ways as well through like workshops and resources, things like that. My education is in health promotion and education, and I'm also a certified health education specialist. And here's just a couple of the things that I do in my job. So I teach canning. I was once a radio host, and I still do a lot of radio spots with UPR. I'm our Create Better Health, which is SNAP-Ed for the state of Utah, nutrition education for Davis County. I run a youth a physical activity initiative called Marathon Kids. I host an annual wellness conference. I host community walks during the summer. And I'm also part of, I facilitate a group in Davis County that focuses on the food environment, so food insecurity. So those are just a couple of the big things that I do in addition to workshops like this. So let's dive it right on in. Stress and burnout are usually, they come hand in hand, right? Burnout impacts us on multiple levels. And on the personal level, people struggle with the physical and psychological symptoms. And then organizationally, burnout prevents engagement, teamwork, productivity, and employee longevity. So we're seeing more turnover with burnout, right? This doesn't have to be the case though. Burnout is avoidable. And if you already find yourself experiencing burnout, it can be reversible as well. And stress, when it is not managed and it is extreme and it is chronic, it's always there. That's what leads us down that slippery slope to burnout. So that's why it's so closely related. And usually when you're talking about burnout, you will always hear about stress. And I just want to acknowledge too that stress is important in our life. It helps us in many aspects, but like I said, when it's chronic and it's negative and it's not being managed, that's when it can become harmful to our health. Okay, so burnout isn't just feeling tired or stressed. It's a profound chronic exhaustion of your mind, your body, and your spirit. And it often leads to a sense of helplessness or even detachment. And if you look over the literature, there are really some common themes in what it can manifest, in the way that it can manifest. So exhaustion is one main one that you see on many different lists. So feeling physically and emotionally drained, as well as reduced professional efficiency. So a diminished sense of accomplishment and self-worth really contribute to that. And that's basically that we feel like our efforts aren't making a difference and there's self-doubt that sets in. This can lead to what's called negative filtering, where we really only focus on the troubling aspects of a situation, which further diminishes our ability to manage our emotions and our tasks effectively, instead of focusing on the factors that we do have control over. So it's as if burnout becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, I think I'm failing, so why bother? And then the third aspect is cynicism. So feeling a sense of detachment from your work or responsibilities, and it's often accompanied by negative thoughts about people or tasks. And this is really where a pessimistic perspective can set in. We begin to think about or think negative things that are permanent, pervasive, or personal, and we believe that these negative factors will last forever, that they'll affect every part of our lives, that they're our fault. And that's specifically based on the work of one of the pioneering positive psychologists, Martin Seligman. And so these three together are known as the P's of pessimism. So now that we know what burnout is, just knowing what it is really doesn't help us in tackling it. And it doesn't understand how to go about it. So there are two different models that I've found that really help to describe everything that contributes to burnout other than just saying stress. So the bathtub model is great because it's really visual. And there's a couple of different parts. I hope you can see that on the screen. There's 1, 2, and 3 from the different spouts of water. And we have our results, our support, and our self-care. And those are all pretty self-explanatory, right? The results that we're seeing at work from ourselves, the support that we receive in our institution or our place of work, or even personally as well. And then self-care. So just that ability to take care of ourselves, our mind, our body, and our spirit. And personal agency is an individual's ability to get things done. And so most of us have a set of skills that we can use to do things, as well as some degree of strength to push through. And we also have an amount of time that we can allocate to doing things. So we want to think about our personal agency like the water in a bathtub. When that bathtub is empty, that's when we're starting to experience burnout. And then the bathtub is filled with the results that people get, the support they receive from others, and the self-care that they perform for themselves. And if you can see right at the bottom, there's that little drain coming out, demands. It's exactly what it sounds like, right? Demands placed on people, their ability to regulate those demands. So we have all these things filling our tub. It's kind of like the glass half empty, or not half empty, the filling your glass, right? Making sure that you're taking care of yourself. You can't function from an empty glass. That kind of visual for self-care. It's the same thing with burnout. We have all these things filling our bathtub, but if the demands are too great, we start to see that personal agency go away through the drain, so to speak. And here's the second model. And like I said, the bathtub is really easy to conceptualize and it's a really good visual, but it does fail in situations where employees are getting great results and the demands placed on them aren't large. The burnout that results in these situations can be explained by the gap between these two main components. The first component is the expectations a person has for themselves. Their expectations are usually set internally and informed by what others expect. And they're like this pin on a map that people expect to reach. And the second component is a person's perspective of themselves. And these are invariably not actual results, but rather the belief about those results. So their perception may be slightly better or slightly worse than what's actually being accomplished. Now, the gap between these results and expectations, it's necessary to keep people striving toward their goals, right? That's where that intrinsic motivation comes in, where we want to do a good job, we want to work, we want to be doing what we're doing. But when someone can't adjust their expectations either downward or their perception of results upward enough to kind of keep that tension in check, the results can be devastating. So for both that person as well as the organization. So that if the gap between expectations and the perceived results grow too large, the tension that a person typically uses to drive themselves forward will snap like a rubber band. And that individual soon begins experiencing those symptoms of burning out. And like I said, I really like this model because it does acknowledge that you can be doing all the right things and still experience burnout. And by doing the right things, I mean you're performing well and you do have an organization that's supporting you. Oh, there's the description right there. Sorry about that. I forgot I added all these animations. And then there you go. So what are the signs of burnout? There are a lot of different signs. And like I said, the literature, these are the most common ones that popped up on a lot of the common lists. And I mentioned this at the very beginning. While burnout is often linked to work, it can really happen in any part of life, from caregiving to academic pressures, anything. The key is to recognize the early warning signs and take action before this burnout takes root. And like I said, so the first step in preventing burnout is recognizing these early signs. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process, and it can be really easy to miss these signs because we are so caught up in life. We might be in autopilot, we might be kind of in survival mode and not recognize that these signs and symptoms are actively happening. So we'll talk about this later on, but kind of tapping into mindfulness or daily check-ins, weekly check-ins, saying like, how am I doing, can really help us to identify if we're starting to experience these symptoms. So chronic fatigue is waking up exhausted even after a full night's sleep. Increased irritability can come from it can look like small inconveniences that look like major frustrations. Lack of motivation, tasks that once brought satisfaction now feel overwhelming or pointless. And some physical symptoms that people often experience are headaches, digestive issues, changes in sleep and appetite. And then isolation is a really big one too. Withdrawing yourself from friends, from family, from social obligations, especially, and I think in the office too, if you're in an office where there are multiple people there, kind of, you just walk in with your head down, shut your office door, and then you leave for the day and you're not connecting with anybody in your office. So if you, and then also detachment, and that's what it sounds like, not feeling like you're attached to anything that you're doing with your work. And if you notice any of these symptoms, it's important to pay attention and start to take those steps to immediately regain balance. And that's what the second part of our today's presentation will really focus on, are these prevention as well as management strategies that we can start to practice. I don't know about you all, but in my field, I'm like so tired of hearing about COVID, and I'm so sorry to do this to you all, but I'm gonna talk about COVID a little bit because it did change things for a lot of people, sometimes permanently or just for a long period of time. And it has become almost kind of a traumatic event for some people, right? It changed so much in our life, especially the workplace, that unfortunately I have to be that person that brings it up, even though we're like, how many years later has it been since like the initial pandemic? So sorry, but we can't ignore what COVID did to the workplace as well as our mental health. The APA did a stress survey in 2022, and they do this survey quite often. 63% of adults surveyed in this poll said that their lives were forever changed by the pandemic in the following ways. So they have worse mental health, they have lower physical activity, disturbed sleep, and increased reliance on unhealthy habits. Those are all really common triggers that will land us in burnout. And so we are already experiencing our day-to-day duties with our job and especially our home life as well. And then you add on the impact of COVID. And many of us have returned to the workplace and, we've started to live life normally again, but it's like there's a new COVID every year, right? And not necessarily an illness, but it can be some major event that's like, oh my gosh, it's taking up a part of your brain. And I don't know if there's any Severance watch or viewers here where they sever their work self and their home self. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that's not reality, right? What happens in the workplace affects us at home, and what happens at home affects us in the workplace. So we'll get to ways that we can help with that. And then some other reasons why so many of us are experiencing burnout in so many different fields, especially those in the helping fields, early childcare education, medical, law enforcement, all of those services, right? We are constantly taking care of other people, or in our workplace, it almost seems like we're putting the clientele ahead of us. So we become second tier instead of being a priority. I'm going off on a tangent. I'm so sorry. But this is something that will help, or not help, that will lead us to burnout. And so that APA survey, getting back on subject, they also asked them what was the biggest contributor to their burnout, and workload was the biggest driver. They also asked them what helps to avoid burnout, and it was really, really simple. Recognition. Recognition is one of the most important protective factors. So when we look at workload and recognition, it's finding this really great balance of not being overworked, but also not being undervalued. So if we can, and of course, it'll change every day, right? It's kind of a balance beam, or it's like one of those, like a lava lamp. It's always moving. The landscape is always changing from day to day in the workplace. But if we can find like a good balance between not feeling like you're overworked, but also feeling like you're valued, it will help us avoid burnout. Research has also established that some common drivers of burnout include poor pay and compensation. And some of these are specific to early childcare education as well. Nebraska Extension has a great guide that is specific to childcare or early childcare education or educators. And so these the ones I'm about to pop up are specific to early childcare education. So poor pay and compensation, which is out of our control, right? If that's something that we're focusing on, we're starting to get into that pessimistic, negative view, and it's only going to help push us down that slope to burnout. Workload. So there's our person being given more and more things to do. Something that happens quite often is that people that are doing a great job are given more tasks to do because they are doing such a great job, and without anything being taken off their plate to kind of compensate that, right? And so that is definitely something that contributes to burnout. Misaligned values. So you might find yourself not agreeing with whatever your institution or your organization is doing, or like the mission, and that can also be a factor in burnout. Mismatched conditions from the organization as well. So perhaps the organization doesn't provide supports that are necessary to help keep their employees healthy, their mental health healthy, specifically their mental health. And then negative relationships as well. This was a big one that those childcare educators in Nebraska reported in a survey, is that negative relationships can really take a toll on their mental health, increase their stress, make it so they're not looking forward to work. And that in turn works together with everything else that's happening and gets us to an area of burnout. Now, I want to I want to also comment that burnout is not just caused by stressful work or too many responsibilities. There's some research that suggests that even your lifestyle and personality traits can contribute to whether or not you experience burnout and how often you experience it. I think it's also important to recognize that a lot of people experience burnout on different levels. It's not something that's unique, unfortunately. A lot of us experience it in one capacity or another. It's just how we can get out of it. It's we get into this world of resiliency where we're faced with some kind of disturbance in our life, like burnout. And if we have the tools, we can get out of that little ditch and we can come back either at that same level that we were at before, we can come back a little bit stronger, or we can come back a little bit weaker, but at least get out of that burnout phase. So some of the common causes with our lifestyle that they have found is that if you're somebody that finds yourself that works too much, you don't have relationships, in or I shouldn't say you don't have relationships, you have a lack of supportive relationships, right? So you might have some people that you are able to lean on, and some of us might not. And that definitely is a common cause of burnout, is not having somebody that's in a supportive role. Taking on too many responsibilities without getting help from others, and then also not getting enough sleep. And these are all what they consider to be lifestyle related causes. And then personality related, those who have perfectionistic tendencies, nothing is ever good enough, especially yourself, right? If you're like, oh, I'm never good enough, where that comparison starts to come in, is definitely one of the top causes, as well as far as personality related causes. Having a pessimistic view of yourself as well as the world, the need to be in control, so you're reluctant to delegate to others, and then having that type A personality, that high achieving personality, can also put you at a higher risk for experiencing burnout. And then work related, we've talked about this a little bit already, but feeling like you have little to or no control over your work is a big one in the workplace. If you feel like you don't have autonomy and you don't have any kind of control, that can really take a toll on your mental health. Lack of recognition or reward for good work, like we talked about earlier, it's recognition is the easiest, most effective protective factor in the workplace as far as um, burnout goes. And then not having clear expectations for work or having overly demanding job expectations, and then doing work that's monotonous or unchallenging can lead to burnout. And I think that's one that's really interesting because oftentimes if you think somebody's burnt out, you think, oh, they must have like a really taxing job. And that's not always the case. I don't want to get on too much of a tangent, but I had one of those jobs that was so unchallenging. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be, so it didn't meet my expectations. I was miserable for months until I could find this job. Actually, it was the job I had before this one. So it can also be those jobs that are just, they're not challenging you. And then also working in a chaotic or a high pressure environment can also help uh, push somebody into burnout. I guess I shouldn't say help, can unfortunately get somebody feeling burnt out. So why does all this matter? I think the simple answer is because you matter, right? We are all our own self, our own individuals. We need to start putting ourselves first. And it's a lot harder to do than say, right? Easier said than done. Did I say that right? Yeah. We matter. We need to convince ourselves that we matter. It is human nature to focus on the negative things. There's research that tracks all the way back to our ancestors that your brain is constantly looking for anything negative that's happening because our ancestors, if somebody looked at them weird, they're like, oh, they're going to kill me. They're going to kick me out of the pack. I'm dead. That has stuck with our DNA, is what they have found in their research. And so our brains are actively looking for anything negative, and it's going to take some effort to get out of that and to find the positivity and to find a way that we can get out of any negative situations, right? So I mentioned this already, but Nebraska Extension has a guide specifically for early childcare education. And I have it in this, I think I have it in the sources at the end of this. But as we start to talk about some of these prevention methods, that's a really great resource to look at. They also talk a little bit about a model that's a little bit more specific to early childcare education of how burnout happens in that industry. But let's see here. There's an expert, I think I have her name on the next slide. Her name is Sue, to be determined. I think it's like Sue Varma. She had a great article on psychiatry.org just talking about in her line of work, she was working with people that had experienced or witnessed life-threatening events. And she also worked with people that were just experiencing stress and burnout from everyday life. And what she found is that it didn't really matter in the sense of burnout if it was a super life-threatening event or if it was just an unchallenging job, right? These same people were experiencing burnout, or they were experiencing the same end result. So when burnout goes unchecked, we've talked about this already, it can strip away our agency and push us down that slippery slope to emotional and mental exhaustion. I was right. Sue Varma. Is that what I said? I'm not sure. Did I do that quote twice? Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. So there's that quote I was just talking about. See, the tangents, I get going. I get excited thinking about things and my brain takes me further along. But a happy and healthy workforce, it's good for employees and organizations. I've given this presentation to managers as well, and it was definitely more of a focus on how burnout affects the bottom line. And as far as from the employee perspective, that's like the last thing I want to hear. So I took all of that out. I was like, I don't want to be seen as a cog in a machine, and I'm sure you all don't want to either. But we can't ignore the fact that burnout does impact the organization's bottom line. And so that's kind of the way that we can maybe speak. Well, never mind. I was gonna say that's how we can talk to our supervisors. Say, hey, you need to take care of our mental health and burnout, or else it's going to affect your bottom line. Don't do that. But that's something that managers and supervisors need to be aware of. We spend, I think it's like 90,000 hours of our lifetime at work on average. So it's a great place to address mental health is at the work level. And so, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about what the organization or what managers can do. This is a nice little model that is specific to extension, which is also full of educators. And talking about how we can tackle burnout in 3 different ways. So we have organizational policies, individual awareness and education, as well as environmental factors. And so we're going to really just focus on organizational policies quickly. And we, as employers or managers or supervisors, we need to be aware that employees are leaving their jobs for companies that have programs and services and benefits that support their mental health and well-being. It's something that has changed over the past couple of years where the expectation was on the employee to take care of themselves. There's been a dramatic shift where that expectation is also on the organization as well, that there should be something at the agency level that is there for an employee to use. And these are all research-based programs or strategies that they can do on the more administrative level. And some of them work for some organizations, some of them don't. The first one is to train managers as far as what's available for health and wellness programs, as well as getting them trained in the programs themselves. So there's trainings like QPR, is a question. Oh my gosh, I can't think of the P. Persuade and refer. It's suicide prevention. So getting them trained in that so they are aware of the signs that suicide might show up in the workplace. Providing flexibility. So that's what it sounds like, right? Having the option to flex your day. If you're at a desk job from 8 to 5, but you're out teaching from 6 to 8, can you flex the next day? That's just something that is specific in my line of work, at least. Providing health insurance, making sure that you listen and act. So not just asking people for what will help, but also acting on it, either looking into it and finding whether or not it's an option or pursuing it and providing it for their employees. Looking into equity, diversity, inclusion policies, and then providing mental health programs. And there are typically 6 factors that contribute to workplace resilience, and this is based on an areas of work life survey. And so these are things that we can actively work into the workplace to increase that resilience. So it's things like having a manageable workload or having that expectation. So knowing what your workload is can even just be helpful. Like I said, recognition or like praise, having a sense of community, having a sense of control, fairness, as well as purpose. And there are experts that have observed when employers do each of these well, they have a happier and more engaged workforce. And in the organizations that don't do these things, people are actively leaving and seeking employment elsewhere. So that to wrap up the organizational part, managers can change the degree to which they risk burnout in their organizations by spending more time recognizing results, providing better support, and encouraging self-care, making it easier for their employees to manage their demands to an appropriate level, which hopefully all of our organizations are doing. And if they are not, then there is a lot of resources out there for managers or organizations to start doing that. Okay, I'm going to take a drink really quick. We're going to move on to really like the important stuff, right? All that stuff we've talked about is great to help us understand burnout and kind of hopefully as you were listening to that, we're like, oh yeah, I do experience that in my day-to-day life, or oh yeah, I do have struggle with giving away control. I don't like delegating. It can kind of, and hopefully non-judgmentally, right? We don't want to be mean to ourselves. We can kind of pay attention to our personality types, our lifestyle, our workplace, and think about which of these strategies might help. And it might be kind of a process of elimination, just trying something. And if it works out, awesome. If it doesn't, then move on to a new one. And these are all research-based. So science proves that they do, in fact, work. It just might not work for certain individuals as well as a different strategy. So the first one we're going to talk about is setting boundaries. And this is all about protecting your time and energy by setting these clear boundaries, but also honoring them. We want to make sure that if you're setting them, you also follow through, because they're not going to do us any good if you don't feel comfortable saying no. If that's a boundary that you want to set, that if something is going to be topped on or given to you on top of your workload and you're already busy and you feel like, well, I have to say yes to this person, that's not honoring your boundary of saying like, no, I'm going to say no to things that are not in my direct role statement or in my direct responsibility. And so this can be done by prioritizing your tasks and saying no to the less critical ones, or delegating, or you can work with somebody. That can also be something that works really well as well if you do feel like you can't say no. And hopefully nobody feels like they can't say no. Hopefully it's more like hopefully your organization doesn't make you feel that way. Having clear work hours is a really easy way to set boundaries, and again, honoring them. So if you are somebody who takes work home with you, is constantly checking emails, and you're starting to feel kind of drained, and the next day comes, you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I haven't even stepped away from the office. This could be a good indication that this is not a boundary, prevention method to explore. So having those set work hours, taking the notifications off of your app for your email, taking away any like the notification, like anything like that would prompt you to look at your phone or your email, whatever that looks like. And then setting boundaries can also look like setting aside time for relaxation and hobbies out of work or outside of work. So I'm trying to think of an example. I have a coworker that she's my next door neighbor that goes to yoga once a week, and she knows what time the class starts. And unless it's something that's like important, it has a deadline, it's critical, she's going to say no. She's going to prioritize doing that yoga class. And for some older generations, that might be something kind of harder to be like, oh, that's okay. And again, this might work for you and your organization, and it might not. But she's been an employee for a very, very long time, and she is on board with prioritizing, saying, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to flex my time, and I'm just not going to take a lunch that day. So that's one way that you can set boundaries, is setting time aside for that relaxation and hobbies outside of work, but also maybe in work as well. We'll talk about that as a prevention method here shortly. Mindfulness and stress management. Mindfulness has been such a buzzword that a lot of us might kind of towards it. I don't know a good word for that. Just like, okay, yeah, mindfulness. We've all heard this before, but it's super, super simple and it's super, super effective. So mindfulness is just staying in that present moment. You're acknowledging any thoughts that come, but you're also letting them go. And it can help manage stress and help us feel grounded when you start to feel overwhelmed. And some different ways that we can start to work in mindfulness is, and this is my favorite way to talk about any kind of healthy hobby, is to take a look at your daily routines, things that you know you will be doing every single day. And then thinking, okay, can I spare 2 minutes to add in a couple of mindfulness exercises here? It could be simple, like a deep breathing exercises. If you are somebody who can quiet their mind and meditate, that's a great option first thing in the morning. It can be done during lunchtime where maybe the 10 minutes before you come back to work, you're spending that time just kind of sitting in silence, taking some deep breaths. You can go through guided meditations. There's a lot of apps out there that can provide this for you. If you're somebody like me who can't just like sit on their own and meditate, if I do that, I'll just start to think of things or I'll start singing songs in my head. So I am not a good meditator, but it's okay. I'm a great deep breather. And that's a really great option too. It introduces oxygen into your bloodstream, which goes into your brain, which eliminates that brain fog, starts to enhance your overall mood, your clarity. And it's super, super simple, right? We can all breathe. We just don't usually do deep breaths very often. We can also engage in progressive muscle relaxation to release any tension. And so that is kind of going through your body and feeling for any tension that you might have. So for me, I hold a lot of tension in my shoulders. I would tense them up purposefully and then let them go to try to to almost kind of like piggyback on that tension that's already there. And then when I purposefully relax, hopefully that tension will also dissipate with the tension that I introduced on purpose, if that makes sense. And then something else that you can do that's a mindfulness practice is to journal. And you could either do this on traditional paper and with a pen, you could do it in your notes. There are a lot of apps out there. Just journal to kind of like brain dump. You could use a gratitude journal where there's prompts where you're writing down things that you're grateful for, or to process stress. It can kind of become like your venting journal where you're not using somebody to vent to, but you're pouring it out all on paper, right? There's even some practices where they suggest writing down your stresses on a piece of paper and then crumpling it up and like burning it or throwing it away or something like that. The act of taking it away from your life can help your brain to process that stress management. And then general self-care, and we're going to think beyond like spa days, or I'm going to go treat myself to a treat, which is absolutely self-care still. I don't want to diminish that, but I don't want to focus on those kinds of acts. I'm talking about more intentional steps that really positively affect your mind, your body, and your spirit. So it could look like things that we should be doing every year, right? Sometimes life gets away from us and we don't get around to it, but scheduling those preventive exams every single year, making sure that you're going to the doctor for your eyes, your general appointments, anything that you have issues for. Dermatology is one big one that my husband and I have set a goal for ourselves this year. We're going to the derm. We want to get checked out every year just in case, right? Being consistent in the hours of sleep that you have is just as important as the total numbers of sleep is what they found. So if you're somebody who gets 6 hours of sleep, making sure that you're consistent in when or in those hours. It's not so much of like, I have to go to bed at 10 p.m. every single night so I can get my 10 hours. If you're able to kind of be flexible in when you get those hours, as long as you're consistent, research has shown that's just as beneficial as the amount of time you're getting, because the general recommendation for sleep is about 7 to 9 hours, but we're all different. Some people need a lot more, some people need a lot less. So really being in tune to where you feel good will be super helpful. There are some researchers that say that if there was a magic pill for health, and when I say health, I mean everything, mental health, physical, social, emotional, it would be sleep. So really focusing on sleep, getting quality sleep. So not looking at your phone, switching it for a different kind of routine, helping you get into those different cycles of sleep can be so beneficial to all aspects of our health and wellness. That's for a different day, though. That's a different topic. Okay, so other things that we can do are to eat balanced meals to stabilize our energy levels and reduce our irritability. I'm sure we have all been hangry at one point in our life, maybe more so than others, right? I have a 4-year-old who she will say no to everything I offer her and just become the hangriest little being in the world. And as soon as she has like a banana, everything's great. So we're this, it's like our toddler selves never go away. We have to feed ourselves, and it needs to be a balanced meal. So I'm one who is a definite supporter of everything in moderation. There's a lot of research that shows if you deprive yourself of cravings, that you actually start to think about it more. And when you have that craving, you binge. And so honoring any cravings, but just being mindful about it, putting it away when you're done. Um, Eating a balanced meal can really help with our overall mental health and physical health. And then also moving your body. So exercising or just being active, really any amount of time throughout the day, but a 20-minute walk has been shown to significantly reduce stress. And something else with moving your body is to do something that you like. So if you're somebody who hates running, I would not suggest to start running. Figure out what you like to do. It could be pickleball, it could be roller skating. It could be any type of movement. As long as you're getting that heart pumping, you're going to start to see those benefits. And then connecting with others to prevent isolation. Social connection is another one of those magic pills for health. So socializing outside of work, within work can be really helpful. And as we get older, as we progress through life, we tend to go from quantity of friends to quality. So we start off life with a lot of friends, and as we get older, we tend to see fewer friends, but that are more established. They are true friends. They're somebody that you can support, or that you can support, and that can provide support to you. So making sure that you have those opportunities to connect. And there are resources out there where if you are kind of like, I don't feel like I have very many friends, or I want more friends, there are a lot of different ways to find people that are interested in the same kind of things as you. So it could be as simple as joining a hiking group to find somebody that's like-minded, right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
Emma, there's
Yes.
something in the chat,
Uh-huh.
if you want to read it, but it says, Elizabeth says, I recently learned that one of the things we should not do is to bring paperwork into the bed. In addition, any mobile laptop. Many teachers do that in order to do corrections to students' homework.
Yes, and I think the reasoning behind that is because we want our brain to acknowledge that the bed is for rest. The bed is for leisure. It is not for work. And I am not gonna lie, I had my laptop in bed with me last night as I was doing some last minute edits on this presentation. It happens, right? But no, that's a great comment that it is important to try to, as to best to our ability, right? We don't want to beat ourselves up over it, but keeping our sleeping space almost sacred, right? That's our place of relaxation. It's where we can be ourselves. If you're somebody who's messy, it's like, be messy. Be messy in your room, right? If that's if that's your truest self, if that makes sense. It seems so silly, but you're giving yourself that opportunity to be authentic, if that makes sense. Okay, something else. I'm going to try to wrap up here quickly. Reframing our perspective. We talked about this a little bit already with our personality types, where if you see things in a negative or pessimistic view, then it's going to impact you in a negative and a pessimistic way. So changing the way that you see responsibilities can really help to fight burnout. So instead of seeing them as burdens, you can see them as opportunities for growth. And it can be as simple as focusing on the positive parts of your job. I'm sure there are things that we all have to do as part of our jobs. We're like, ugh, I don't want to do that. But we can, instead of doing it or focusing on like that, say, I'm going to do the thing that I don't like first. So then that way I can get to the more fulfilling things. Or maybe you're somebody who likes to put it off till the very last thing. It's whatever is most beneficial for you as an individual. But what's key is almost turning on that mental flashlight to find any positive aspect of your job or that workload that can really help. Something else is breaking larger tasks into smaller pieces. I was just with some Head Start teachers, and this woman had the best saying, and I can only remember the second part. An inch is a cinch. Oh, I can't remember the other part, but it was something that was basically saying that taking things by a little step is a lot, or little bites and pieces is a lot easier than taking on the whole thing. Oh, I'll have to reach out to her. It was so great. It was so cute. Her grandmother had taught her an inch is a cinch. It might be like a mile is a while. I don't know. It was something that rhymed. But it's kind of that thing where you're just taking on those manageable pieces, breaking it up. That can kind of signal to your brain that it's easier.
Oh, Emmett says an inch and a cent is a cinch, a yard is hard.
A yard is hard. That's what it is. I'm like, a while and a mile? A yard is hard. Okay, thank
Right.
you.
Thank you, Google.
Perfect. It was so cute. We loved it. Something else that we want to do to help reframe our perspective is to celebrate small victories. Yes, we hopefully that our organization or our institution, wherever we work, is helping to celebrate these things with achievement, recognition, but we want to self-celebrate too. If you do something that you've been putting off and you're like, yes, I did it. You could even be as simple as verbalizing it. It can be treating yourself to something, or telling somebody about your small victory can be huge too. Having that opportunity to share it with somebody will help to ingrain that celebration. And then this is something too that is part of another curriculum, The Road to Happiness and Meaning by Dr. Dave Schramm. He's a USU specialist, and part of his curriculum talks about avoiding complaining just to vent. There's research that is showing us that when you're just complaining to complain, it's just ingraining that pathway in your brain to be more negative. Whereas if you're complaining to find a solution, that's actually beneficial. Or if you're venting to find a solution, it can be beneficial, and it'll help get you out of that negative pathway, that negative perspective. Okay, taking breaks and disconnecting, pretty self-explanatory. We're in a really fast-paced world, so we constantly have access to work oftentimes with our phone, right? In addition to work and our other roles in life, we're also connected to everything else that's happening through social media. And it can be really overwhelming for the body. We're not meant to take in all of this information that we're getting shown through social media. And it does a number on our mental health, which then affects our physical health, which then affects our social health, and so on and so on. Everything is interconnected. So some different ways that we can take breaks and disconnect is to time block on your calendar. If you're somebody that really enjoys using like a digital calendar and you kind of live by it, or a planner, writing in your planner or your calendar, for this 20 minutes, I am going to go take a walk without my phone. So once you get that little notification, you're out of here. That can really be helpful. So that way, especially in my world, I won't schedule a meeting during that time block. Something else that's really easy is eating lunch away from your work as well as your phone, specifically social media. So you could still take it with you if you enjoy listening to to some music or some podcast or something like that. Just not that doom scrolling that we all get sucked into. And then setting boundaries for checking emails after hours. We've talked about this one a little bit already, where you can turn off your notifications so you're not getting prompted to jump into your email or your Slack or whatever it might be. And then planning regular vacations or mental health days for a recharge can be really helpful too. There's research, I can't remember what university it came out of, but they said that the most effective way we can help employees not experience burnout is allow and I guess give that accrual for time to take time off for up to 2 weeks. 2 weeks minimum is what we need to fully recharge. I'm not gonna lie, when I first heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, I'd come back to work stressed. Be like, oh, I have to go through all my emails now. So even though research says it's beneficial or it is really effective, we need to pay attention to what might not be as effective for ourselves as individuals. That can be a really good example of, yes, it works on paper, but it doesn't work for me in general. Whereas taking a single mental health day here or there is what I prefer personally, and what I'm able to do with the time off that I get through work. Okay, and then hobbies and interests. So just one more slide after this. Making sure that you have an identity outside of work is really important too. This is really true for people that are in those helping disciplines because it's part of our values, right? We're like, I love helping people. I love improving somebody's life. I love teaching somebody something. And it's almost it's like I said, it's part of your core values. And so it can be really easy for your work identity to become your home identity. It's really common in the extension world as well. So making sure that you have an identity and interest outside of work can really be helpful to prevent burnout. And it's really any kind of activity that brings you joy. And I put on there bonus points if it gets you into a flow state. This is something that athletes call like being in the zone, or where you might be painting or reading and you like look up at the clock and realize 3 hours have gone by and you had no concept of time. Go ahead, I see a hand up.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I like the part that you said take the walks and do not take the phone. Um, with the new technology now that those phones they follow you, they follow you everywhere. However, I have this tendency, I take walks and I take pictures of nature and all kind of things, especially I live in where's the cherry blossoms. And I had this lady the other day, I'm taking pictures and I put music in the back and I use them in my television. I download there through YouTube channel. So that helps me during the night when I cannot sleep. It kind of soothes me. And then the lady said, I thought that I was the only one they do that. And just like, yeah, I mean, I like it, you know? So I got 76,000 people like that video that I just did last week.
That's awesome. I'm so glad you brought that up. That reminds me of that's actually a technique that people suggest using for decreasing stress is creating an awe album. So taking your phone with you and taking pictures of things that kind of stopped you in your tracks. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Taking a picture of it, but then going the step further of creating like a channel or an album where you can look at it later will help those feelings of awe come back and that feeling of transcendence. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, then let's move on to the very last one. I think we can, hobbies and interests, right? We're good. We know what hobbies and interests are. And if you're somebody who doesn't have very many hobbies, again, a process of elimination. Try something out. There's no pressure in trying a hobby. And if you don't like it, don't do it. Try something different. Try something that's out of your comfort zone. Further, more bonus points if you can find a hobby that you can do with other people, because then you can kind of stack on the health benefits of socializing. Okay, so asking for help is the last one that is hopefully something that we all feel comfortable doing. And if you don't feel comfortable doing it and you find yourself needing help, I encourage you to push yourself out of that comfort zone and do ask for help. If you're starting to feel overwhelmed, and as we were talking about some of those common signs of burnout, and you're like, ooh, yeah, tick, 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 I feel all those. It could be a sign that it's time to ask for help. And it can range what that help looks like. Can be talking to a colleague or a mentor to help find solutions. Remember, not just to vent. It can be seeking professional help through therapy. A lot of organizations have the EAP or employee assistance programs where a certain amount of therapy sessions are covered through the EAP. And then if it's not therapy that you're interested in, they do have other resources that are available as well. And then we can also lean on our friends and our family outside of the workplace. And that will really help to strengthen your identity, to strengthen those connections outside of work, because they're not in the grind of the daily work. They just know you as a person. And so that can kind of be helpful when you're asking for help or you want somebody else's perspective on something that's happening or whatever it might be. But that's all I have for you. I know that I sent the presentation to Janelle, so you'll have access to these sources, but there's that top one I was talking about earlier, Nebraska Extension, decreasing burnout and promoting well-being among early childhood educators. They actually did a survey with a lot of educators in Nebraska, and so this is all coming from people that are actually doing the work. It's not what's unfortunately like the typical, well, I'm a researcher and this is what the science says helps. They actually have gone to the people and they have tied it with the literature to figure out what actually works for this profession. And I know you are all doing a different survey, and I should have asked if it was okay if I could also suggest this survey. This one is completely anonymous, and it's just feedback to make sure that, one, you're learning what I'm intending you to learn. Does that make sense? I don't think that was correct grammar. That you are learning what it's meant to be taught, I guess. And that if there's any ways that I can improve the presentation for future audiences, it's super helpful for me. But that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Well, I just want to thank you so much for that great presentation. I kept on jotting down notes, and am really looking forward to reading that article on the Nebraska thing. I also really loved that venting journal and the Grateful Journal. So yeah, we can leave it open for a few questions if anybody has any. Or insights.
Emma, can I just ask a quick question? So,
Yeah.
In the event of burnout, like I loved that you mentioned that burnout doesn't always just come from work. Sometimes like work is maybe the one thing that you feel like in your life you've got going, and maybe it's work or something else like that. But, you know, say for instance, work is the place that you feel like things are going well, but maybe you are feeling burnout because, you know, other aspects of your life just don't feel like you've got it together. And so maybe because work is the place that you feel like you've got things together, but you're struggling to figure out how to deal with your burnout, but you need some supports or resources, like, you know, what are some ways that you can kind of like carry the some of those strategies and things into your personal life and kind of get your family or some of those other individuals maybe in your life on board in some of the things that you're trying to do to help correct that burnout. I mean, it's kind of nice when you're in a professional setting, right? Because you have colleagues or that, or even if you can communicate that where to administration and you can help communicate the advantages of working on burnout, but sometimes in professional or personal or other avenues, that's not always the case. So sometimes it feels a little bit helpless or hopeless to try and deal with burnout in those other aspects.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. Especially in something that's really been big lately is like the mental load of the primary parent, the primary, I guess, adult in the household. If you live by yourself, if you're the person that has to do the day-to-day things, right? And I think there are definitely ways that you can take some of the things that we talked about today and apply it to personal lives. The one that I would suggest first is setting boundaries. And this one can be tough, especially with family members, because a lot of times the family member that you're trying to set the boundaries with interpret the boundaries as being a negative thing, when in reality, you're putting these boundaries in place so you can have a better relationship with that person or whatever it might be, right? It's like, I'm not doing this out of a hateful place. I'm doing it out of a loving place. So my brain goes to boundaries when you have a newborn, just because that's been my life the past year. Sometimes they take offense to saying like, do not kiss my baby on the lips is a common boundary, right? And they're like, well, why? I love that. I want to show my love. And you almost have to go on to explain your boundary, which then diminishes your boundary. So it's a tricky thing to navigate. And I certainly don't have all the answers. But I guess long tangent short, there are ways that we can apply these prevention methods into our personal life. And it could almost be like having a conversation with the people that you are struggling with, or the relationships that are overwhelming, that are stressful, to not only explain where you're coming from, but also saying like, this is what I would like to work on, and this is what I have found. Something that also, sorry, just popped into my brain is this resource called Fair Play that is for married couples or domestic couples where they're living together, that is helping to split the load in a fair way, right? And there's a card game, there's a documentary, there's even like, hey, and they have suggestions on how to introduce it to your partner. Like, hey, I found this cool documentary. Do you want to watch it with me? Is like step one. And then you say, oh, they have a book, or they have a card game, and oh, they have a book. Like, so there's all these different steps that you can take. But hopefully that really long-winded answer helped that question.
Elizabeth will take your question or comment, and then we'll move to our breakout groups.
All right,
Our
okay.
breakout groups are
About what she just said, Emma just talked about setting boundaries, about do not kiss my children in the lip. This is a must, because I have seen cases that people do not know, and they have mouth
Cold
herpes.
sores. Mm-hmm.
And the child, I seen this, the child lost almost his eye.
Ugh.
It's bad, and people don't understand. I know that my daughter, she doesn't like it, and she says straight, do not do that. She don't care, but she understands the complications of it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And she nobody, you know. I think that she's the only one, but I don't do that with, she doesn't do that with me, but I don't do that anyway. So, but I know about this is a very important, and people don't realize it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's true, you know, this is not a very good habit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrifying what can happen. And I think we can almost take that same kind of thought pattern with any other boundary that we need to set, that it might not be as physically, or you can't see as much of what's happening, how it's negatively impacting somebody, as like if cold sores were to spread. But if we can articulate that it's having a negative impact on yourself, like mentally and emotionally, it can hopefully help to get that relationship or that family dynamic onto the path to be a little bit less overwhelming, or to help split that mental load, or whatever the issue is with that stress.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And so I am going to turn the time over to JC. He is going to facilitate our case discussion. I'm really excited about this process. So, JC.
Great, thank you, Janelle, for turning it over. So, hi everyone. Today, you all are the case study. That's what we're going to do. You get to be the case that we're talking about. So we're going to have a conversation about burnout prevention, and if we weren't able to prevent it, how do we get back to a healthier balance that Emma was talking about. So the idea is to spend this time in a solution-focused mindset. So that what that means is, versus talking about how did we get here, why are we burned out, what caused the burnout, we're starting from a place of recognizing that we may have already experienced burnout, we might be experiencing it currently, but what is the solution going forward? What can we do proactively to move back into a healthier space and a balance if we're experiencing any of those things? So this is one of those things where, as lovely and sometimes supportive as venting can be about all the reasons why we're burnt out, we'll save that for another space. And today we'll kind of stay focused on what is it that we can do collectively, individually. And the idea behind this conversation is, you all know what I'm talking about because you've all experienced this at some level, right? I don't have to describe to you what burnout is. Emma's done a fantastic job talking to it. So you've probably been doing some self-reflection like I was at different bullet points, like, oh, yeah, that's pretty familiar. Yep, kind of felt that way this week or have felt that way in the past. So you all have that. And so what we're going to do is draw on the wisdom of the group. The wisdom of the group that's here. We're going to talk and have a conversation, because you might be doing something that you think is maybe a little silly or not that big of a deal, and it might actually be a game changer for somebody in our conversation. It might feel like that is something, oh, I could do that. I could do that. I'm going to try that. And then you try it for the next week and it makes a difference. So this is that idea where when we're talking about the questions that I've posted in the chat, no item is too small to bring up as far as the solution. So what we're going to talk about is, and I don't know, Janelle, we're going to break into still smaller groups, right?
Yes, we are. And so I've just dropped your questions into the chat right now for everybody.
Let me give some framing for the second one in particular. And I think we had talked about every group talking about all three questions and then coming back together and having a nice brainstorm list. The first question is pretty straightforward, right? What's been working well for you in this area, either individually or, maybe your agency's done something really well. Emma talked a lot about recognition and those little things. Maybe your agency has a great way of recognizing achievements, big and small, that build morale and help with burnout. So what's been working well for you or has worked well in the past at the individual or agency level? The second one comes from a modality called solution focused. And it's this idea that if you went to sleep tonight and woke up tomorrow and somehow some magical thing had happened and everything was different and better, what is it that would be different? What is it that's missing that if tomorrow morning it was present would make your life better in this area? And if we can name those things, it gives us an opportunity of having a space where we can work towards some of those things. And then the final is just other thoughts you have to share. So I think with that, we can just jump into our groups, Janelle, and have that conversation.
Okay, so again, as we're in our breakout groups, it's a great way to build those personal connections like she talked about. So doing some introductions before just jumping right into those questions. They are in chat. So the hub members, if you want to take those, copy those down. And then Shayna, if you want to go ahead and open up those breakout groups, we will come back together about 1:25. All right, well, welcome back. Thank you, everybody. JC, can I put you on the spot and have you facilitate this wrap up?
I mean, I'm always on the spot with you, Janelle, so that's fine. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know what my group talked about. I'd love to know what the other groups talked about. We really kind of talked mostly about the first question, about what's been working well and some little things. But who led the other groups? I don't even know. Heather?
Oh, it was Heather's group.
Heather, do you have somebody from your group that wants to chime in?
Leo took notes for us, but I think I can probably synthesize for the most part. And Leo, correct me if I'm wrong, okay? But in general, we talked about, it sounds like a lot of us are fairly good at using a lot of the skills that were covered in the presentation, but there were a few favorites that were listed with regards to individuals who were using things like going for walks, getting out and taking some of that me time, also joining things like social support groups and getting out and doing things with others. Like one of our individuals has joined a social hiking group and getting out and doing things with others. And then also making sure that we make time for hobbies, not just talking about it, but also taking the initiative to do it. And then some of the other things that were talked about were just, things like the deep breathing and then the sharing, communicating, sharing hobbies, interacting with others, and giving the opportunity to really make those connections with other people. Those were all really important aspects that we kind of discussed as our group.
Yeah, great. Anybody else from that group that wants to chime in before we switch? Okay. One of the things that we talked about was more like at the agency level is that idea of as leaders or if you're in a position to build flexibility for your staff in little and big ways, and you don't have a lot of control often about the funding and the budgets and the things like that. You can't just hand out more money. And as Kurt pointed out, that's not always the solution to not being happy at work, right? It doesn't hurt for me to have a little bit more money, but it doesn't solve the real core root of burnout. So the idea of like building in flexibility of schedules and just workflow and things of that nature goes a long way. And we talked a little bit about recognition as well. Just how Heather said a really good thing, like, people don't usually leave companies, they leave leaders. And so if you're in a leadership position, really building a culture that with little things and big things that make people want to stay. I'll say this, I didn't get to say this in the group, but one thing is I talk to my students about self-care a lot, and Emma mentioned that self-care piece. And I try to broaden their perspective on what self-care is. It is the things like eating your vegetables and doing the run and doing, Netflix binging or whatever. But a radical form of self-care is to live a life in line with your core values. And so I talk to my students, like, you being in graduate school and doing homework is actually a form of self-care. It's not binging Netflix and it's not going to the spa, but you're doing something now. Self-care doesn't mean it's not hard. Self-care can be those self-improvement things that really are in line with your values, like training for a marathon or for a particular hike you want, whatever that is. It's the hard work that brings that value, and that is a form of self-care. Sometimes I think we gloss over, and like, it's all the things that we just want to do because they're fun and they're easy. But self-care can be like really putting yourself towards the goal and your values. And to me, that's about burnout, is coming back to my why. Why do I do this? Why am I doing this work in the first place? What drove me here? What keeps me here? But anyway, I think that's kind of where we were with our conversation, and it's time to be done.
Yes, it is time to be done. So if you guys will send over all of your notes that you took to the time to act at aggies.usu.edu. What is that email? And then we'll compile those so everybody can look at those on Canvas and utilize those resources. Our next session will be May 21st, same time, same place. So hopefully we will see everybody there. Thank you. And thank you, Emma, for staying on. I'm jealous that I wasn't in your group to hear more of your things. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.